Hey superstars, it's been a while since I've made a video on this game, hasn't it? As you guys may know, Chapter 5 has finally been released to the public. Just like I promised in my last video for Deltarune, I'd come back with another topic to share more of my thoughts in the game. You can probably expect me to milk a couple more ideas about what the future of this can have in store, but holy, there is a lot to talk about. But I think I need more time to really think through many of these ideas before I can give my full conclusions and theories on everything that this chapter has gave us. Of course, as stunning as the game was, that'll be a topic for another video. Today, I wanted to talk about one of the most drastic parts of this chapter, the one and only Weird Root. Now, spoilers for everyone who hasn't played Chapter 5 yet, we'll be diving into some pretty heavy spoiler territory. I have a potential small theory that might answer some of the biggest questions raised by this chapter. It could explain the intense ending and why it seems to go far beyond what I originally expected, rather than simply being another smaller change to the game like I previously thought. Now, if you haven't seen Chapter 5's Weird Root yet, let me give you a quick breakdown of what happens. I'll sprinkle in some of my own thoughts along the way to help provide a little bit of context. Basically, everything drastically changes from the ending of Chapter 4. In the normal route, we wake up after seeing Chris climb back through their bedroom window, possibly implying they have been out there during the night before they're returning and to retrieve their soul. In the Weird Route, however, things are completely different. Chris is still lying in the bed exactly where we left them. It's implied that they stayed the entire day, possibly because of the severe consequences of what happened the previous day, leaving them unwilling to face reality. Since we aren't trapped inside the cave this time, we can actually force Chris out of bed, though depressing, and continue progressing through the game. Toriel even encourages us to get moving. For the remainder of the day, as the sun begins to set, Susie is waiting outside for Chris despite the festival already being over. She decides to spend the rest of it with them anyways. Eventually, we come across Sans, who's still selling ice cream. Susie and Chris decide to buy some. Remember that moment because it'll become very important for later. As the festival finally comes to an end, we run into Noelle, who had been hoping to see Chris there. The two share a quiet one-to-one conversation by the lake before both Chris and Noelle willingly walk deeper into the water, pushing themselves all the way to the edge of the lake. The chapter then ends abruptly as the screen cuts to black, displaying a CRT-style screen reading Chapter 7 Side B. I'm not going to explain what that means here, but if you want a deeper analysis on the Weird Root and what Side B could represent, I highly recommend checking out Sodaman, who explains the topic in much more greater detail. What's important here is just how different this Weird Root feels compared to the previous ones. It's by far the shortest route we've gone so far, which I found incredibly intriguing, but I think that's intentional. You see, I don't believe the Weird Route is only a meta-narrative about breaking the game's intended path anymore. I still absolutely think that's part of it, especially with Noelle's dialogue and the recurring idea of bringing the rules through sheer determination, even pushing beyond the boundaries of the lake itself, but I think it's also connected to something much bigger. I think this is exactly what we are brought here for, the beginning of Deltarune. Now, we all know the theory that Gaster is the one who brought us here. It's something fans have suspected ever since Entry 17, and even since before Deltarune officially released, with the tweets that were coming out in social media of the implication of Gaster communicating with us. Deltarune has always been Gaster's experiment, whether it's connected to determination experiments from Undertale or something entirely different. The game itself hasn't revealed much about why this experiment is so important. Up until now, he mostly existed as a mysterious figure behind the scenes and as a narrator supporting many of the game's overarching themes. But I think the Weird Route might finally be our first real glimpse into why we were brought here, and why we're capable of changing things in ways nobody else can. Now, I want to bring up something that I mentioned earlier. Remember what I said about Sans? If you pay close attention, he's the only major character still hanging around after the festival ends, and regardless of which route you're on, the game always forces the same outcome before you can continue. Whenever you try to head to the lake without buying ice cream first, Susie actually refuses to let you go until you've visited Sans. Once you do, Sans asks you to fill out a punch card before he'll sell you the ice cream. That little interaction is incredibly important. The drawing Susie leaves on the punch card directly connects back to Undertale. Inside Sans and Papyrus's house, one of the jars contains a drawing of 3 people you don't recognize, which appears to reference that same punch card. This has also been one of the strongest pieces of evidence suggesting that Sans isn't actually from Undertale's world originally. The interesting part, though, is that while both routes ultimately reach the same destination, there's one tiny difference. In the normal route, Susie draws herself, Chris, and Noelle together. But in the weird route, since Noelle never joins us, Susie instead draws herself, Chris, and Ralsei. That's incredibly important because it makes you wonder, which drawing do we actually see in Undertale? Well, what if we assume that, by any chance, it is the weird routes drawing that connects more? And the only reason I say that isn't because I think it outright confirms anything. In reality, there's simply not enough information to definitively say whether the drawing was of Noelle or Ralsei. But if Toby intended the jar to serve as a broader hint toward Deltarune's future, then Chris, Susie, and Ralsei fit that role much more naturally. After all, those 3 are the faces of Deltarune. They're the central trio we followed since Chapter 1, the heroes of the prophecy, and the characters most closely tied to the game's overarching story. Noelle is undeniably important, especially with everything surrounding the weird route, but she's still ultimately a supporting character within the larger narrative. So, if Sans truly carried that drawing over from Deltarune into Undertale, it would make far more sense for it to represent the 3 characters most synonymous with the game itself. But why is this drawing specifically different in the weird route? Why would Toby deliberately replace Noelle with Ralsei? Well, maybe it's because the weird route is actually the version of events that's most relevant to whatever connection Deltarune has with Undertale. Now, I've gone back and forth on this idea for a while, and I'm still not completely convinced. It's the definitive answer. After all, Deltarune has repeatedly emphasized that there's only one ending, so even the normal route could still naturally lead into Undertale in some fashion. But if Toby is deliberately trying to connect Deltarune's past to Undertale through this drawing, especially one depicting the main trio alongside the phrase, "Don't forget," then the weird route has to carry some kind of larger narrative significance. What if, ever since we first entered the survey at the beginning of Deltarune, the weird route was always intended to be the true purpose of Gaster's experiment? Not because it's the canon ending, but because it's the hidden variable, the outside force, the path we're only able to uncover by breaking the game's intended rules. And honestly, doesn't that line up with everything Deltarune has been building toward? The game's central theme has always revolved around resisting fate, challenging predetermined paths, and questioning the rules of the world itself. The weird route doesn't just reflect those ideas, it actively forces the player to embody them. Even the secret bosses reinforce this motif. Every single one of them has been confronted with some truth that shattered their understanding of the reality, and many of those mysteries seem to circle back to Gaster in one way or the other. There is even more evidence pointing in that direction. Sean, for example, seems to possess knowledge they shouldn't have, almost as if they're aware of the larger experiment unfolding around them. The shadow crystals continue to grow in importance even outside the weird route, and by chapter 5, Sham outright tells us they have something very, very interesting waiting for us with those shadow crystals. That isn't the kind of dialogue Toby writes without reason. So what if the route isn't simply an alternate route at all? What if it's the path Gaster wanted us to discover from the very beginning? At the end of the route, it's pretty clear that Chris and Noelle are being positioned as the central characters moving forward. If Chapter 7 Side B really is what this route continues, I can't help but wonder if that's where Toby finally brings us back to entry 17. Now, this is obviously speculation on my part, but hear me out. At the end of entry 17, Gaster appears to be speaking directly to 2 people. We've never been told of who those 2 individuals are, but what if the weird route is setting up Chris and Noelle to become those people? It would surprisingly fit well. By the end of Chapter 5, Noelle has become increasingly aware that something about her world isn't right. Her dialogue begins questioning reality itself, and the weird route repeatedly pushes the idea that the game's rules are beginning to break. And maybe she's becoming self-aware because of that. If the weird route truly represents the path of breaking beyond Deltarune's intended boundaries, then who better to encounter Gaster than two characters standing at the center of the collapse? Or at least whatever remains of him. After all, we still don't even know if Gaster exists as a single person anymore. His own experiments shattered him across time and space. And then, there's the ending itself. Instead of simply rolling the credits, the game suddenly cuts the CRT screen reading Chapter C Side B. That hidden, almost forbidden feeling reminds me a lot of Entry 17 itself, a piece of dialogue buried outside the normal game in Undertale, hidden away for players willing to dig deeper. So maybe that is the point. Maybe it's breaking through the layers that have separated us from Gaster all along. At the end of the day though, this is just speculation. It's simply one possible interpretation of what Chapter 5 might be setting up, and hopefully something that gets all of you thinking about where the story could be headed. I don't necessarily think this theory is stronger than others, and I'm sure there are details I've completely overlooked, but I do think it's a solid starting point, especially now that we have so many new pieces of the puzzle to work with. I also don't know if this really holds up well, considering that Gaster will be portrayed as villainous if they wanted to run experiments with us having full control and power. Only time will tell us if any of this ends up being true. Hey, speaking of Chapter 5, if you didn't know, I actually brought back my old gaming channel to archive an entire experience. It's a full playthrough of Chapter 5 featuring a live voice-acted cast from members of my Discord community, and honestly, it was a blast to put together. The channel itself has technically been discontinued for a while now, but I figured it'd be still fun to preserve these streams somewhere. If you've ever wanted to watch Chapter 5 with a group of people voicing these characters live, I'd appreciate you checking it out. You'll even find some of our older Deltarune voice acting streams on there as well. They definitely aren't as polished as the newer ones, but I think they're still fun as snapshots of how this project has grown over the years. And who knows, we'll continue doing these more in the future. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. And remember to reach for the stars.